The stillness of dawn was broken by the distant rumble of wagon wheels as Rebecca Sanders stumbled down the dusty main street of Prescott, Arizona, in the summer of 1878. Her once fine dress was torn and soiled, her copper hair falling in tangled waves around a face marked by exhaustion and defeat. The few early risers of the frontier town paused in their morning routines, eyes narrowing with suspicion at the disheveled stranger. Rebecca kept her gaze fixed on the ground before her, the weight of whispers following in her wake like shadows. "Another fallen woman, I reckon," muttered the general store owner to his wife as they watched Rebecca pass. The shame burned hotter than the Arizona sun beginning its merciless climb above the desert horizon. Rebecca had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Everything she'd once possessed, respectability, family, future, had been stripped away, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the disgrace she carried like a brand. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the dizziness was becoming impossible to ignore. Spotting a water trough outside the livery stable, Rebecca moved toward it, thinking only of slaking her thirst before deciding what to do next. As she approached, a tall figure emerged from the stable's shadowed interior. Frank Taylor stood silhouetted against the morning light, his broad shoulders and lean frame unmistakable to the townsfolk, who knew him as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. At 32, Frank had carved out the Circle T Ranch from wilderness through sheer determination and backbreaking work. The years of labor under the Arizona sun had weathered his face, but his eyes remained sharp and observant beneath the brim of his wide Stetson. He watched the woman stumble toward the water trough, noting her fine bone structure beneath the grime and desperation. When she nearly collapsed reaching for the water, Frank stepped forward without hesitation. "Whoa there, madam," he said, catching her elbow before she could fall. "Take it slow." Rebecca flinched at his touch, her body tensing as though expecting a blow. The reaction wasn't lost on Frank, whose expression darkened momentarily. He released her but stayed close, ready to catch her if necessary. I'm sorry," Rebecca managed, her voice hoarse from thirst. "I just need some water." Frank nodded, filling a nearby ladle and offering it to her. "Drink slowly. Too much too fast will make you sick." Rebecca took the ladle with trembling hands, following his advice though her body screamed for her to gulp the water down. After 3 careful sips, she found her voice again. "Thank you, sir. I won't trouble you further." As she attempted to move away, her legs buckled beneath her. Frank caught her again, this time more firmly. "You need more than water, madam. When's the last time you ate?" Rebecca hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. I can't remember." Frank's jaw tightened. "Come on. Molly at the cafe opens early for the ranch hands. She'll have something hot on the stove." "I have no money," Rebecca admitted, the words barely audible. "Didn't ask if you did," Frank replied simply, guiding her toward a small building down the street with a hand-painted sign reading Molly's Cafe. The cafe was already bustling with the early morning crowd, cowboys, miners, and merchants fueling up before the day's work. The conversations dimmed as Frank led Rebecca inside, curious eyes taking in her bedraggled appearance. Molly Winters, a stout woman with iron gray hair and kind eyes, approached them immediately. "Frank Taylor, who's this you're bringing into my establishment at this hour?" Frank removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. "Morning, Molly. This lady needs some breakfast and maybe a place to sit quietly for a spell." Molly's experienced eyes took in Rebecca's condition, the quality of her ruined clothing, the way she held herself despite her exhaustion, and the unmistakable look of someone who had fallen far and fast from grace. "Come on back, honey," Molly said, leading them to a corner table away from prying eyes. "I've got flapjacks and coffee ready." Rebecca found herself seated before she could protest, a steaming mug placed in her hands and a plate of food before her. The smell alone nearly made her weep. "Eat," Frank said, settling across from her. "Then we can talk." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before hunger won out. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as her body reminded her how desperately it needed nourishment. Frank watched her without comment, occasionally nodding to acquaintances but discouraging approach with his expression. When she had finished, he pushed his own coffee toward her. "You look like you could use another. Why are you helping me?" Rebecca asked suddenly, her green eyes lifting to meet his for the first time. "Does it matter?" Frank countered. "It does to me. I have nothing to offer in return." Her voice faltered. "And I'm not the sort of woman a man like you should be seen with." Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what sort would that be?" Rebecca looked down, fingers twisting in her lap. "Ruined," she whispered. "Disgraced." Frank was silent for a long moment, studying her. When he spoke, his voice was low but firm. "Out here, we judge folks by what they do, not what's been done to them." "You don't know what I've done," Rebecca said. "No, I don't," he agreed. "But I know shame when I see it, and I know it's a poor traveling companion." He leaned forward slightly. "Shame has no place on this land, miss. Out here, it's what you do with tomorrow that counts." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I have nowhere to go." "Molly's been looking for help," Frank said, nodding toward the cafe owner who was serving other customers. "She's getting on in years and could use another pair of hands. There's a room above the cafe. It's small, but it's clean." "Why would she hire someone like me? She doesn't even know my name." "Then tell her," Frank said simply, "and let her decide for herself." Rebecca hesitated, then straightened her shoulders slightly. "Rebecca Sanders," she said quietly. "My name is Rebecca Sanders." Frank nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Frank Taylor. I own the Circle T Ranch outside town." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll speak with Molly. Rest here a while longer." Before Rebecca could protest, he moved away, speaking quietly with Molly at the counter. The older woman glanced over at Rebecca, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she nodded and patted Frank's arm. Frank returned, placing a key on the table. "Room's yours if you want it. Molly says you can start tomorrow. Give you time to rest today." Rebecca stared at the key. "I don't understand." "Nothing to understand. People help each other out here. That's how we survive." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever you're running from, Miss Sanders, it might follow you, but you'll find folks around here don't pry much into other people's business." "Thank you," Rebecca said, the words inadequate for the lifeline he'd just thrown her. Frank nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll be in town again end of the week. Might stop by to see how you're settling." Without waiting for a response, he turned and left the cafe, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Rebecca watched him go, the key cool and heavy in her palm, a small piece of metal representing a chance she'd never expected to find. Molly approached the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "Frank's a good man, not many like him left." She nodded toward the back of the cafe. "Stairs are through there, room's not much, but it's private. There's a washroom at the end of the hall you can use now if you'd like to clean up." "I don't know how to thank you," Rebecca said, her voice thick. Molly's expression softened slightly. "Thank me by working hard. I open at 5, close at 8. It's long hours and not much pay, but you'll have meals and a roof." She paused. "Frank didn't tell me your story, and I won't ask. But whatever it is, it stays outside that door when you're working for me. Understand?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, madam." "Good. Now get yourself cleaned up and rest. Tomorrow comes early in Prescott." The room above the cafe was indeed small, but to Rebecca, it might as well have been a palace. A narrow bed with clean linens occupied one wall, a washstand and mirror another, and a simple wooden chair sat beneath the single window overlooking the main street. After bathing in the shared washroom, scrubbing away days of travel and fear, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, watching the town come fully to life below. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think about how she had arrived at this moment: the scandal in Boston, her family's rejection, the desperate journey west with what little money she could gather. She had been running without destination, seeking only distance from the whispers and pointing fingers that had destroyed the life she once knew. Rebecca Sanders, who had once moved easily through Boston's finest drawing rooms, was now a waitress in a frontier cafe. The thought should have brought fresh shame, but instead she felt only exhaustion and a strange, tentative relief. Perhaps here, where no one knew her name or her past, she might find a way to exist without the constant weight of disgrace. As she lay down on the bed, her body surrendering to the first safe sleep she'd had in weeks, Rebecca found herself thinking of Frank Taylor's words. Shame has no place on this land. She wondered if that could possibly be true, or if it was just another false promise in a life that had seen too many broken. Either way, tomorrow would come. And for the first time in a long while, Rebecca had somewhere to be when it did. The first weeks at Molly's cafe passed in a blur of exhaustion and adaptation. Rebecca learned quickly how to balance plates up to her elbow, how to gauge a customer's mood with a glance, how to deflect unwanted attention with a firm but polite word. Her hands, once soft and manicured for piano and needlepoint, grew calloused from hot plates and constant washing. Molly proved to be a stern but fair employer. She worked Rebecca hard but protected her fiercely from the occasional drunk cowboy or miner who mistook politeness for invitation. The older woman never asked about Rebecca's past, though sometimes Rebecca caught her watching with knowing eyes when she thought Rebecca wasn't looking. The townsfolk of Prescott regarded the newcomer with initial suspicion that gradually evolved into cautious acceptance. Rebecca kept to herself, speaking little beyond what her job required, giving no one reason to question her presence or her history. True to his word, Frank Taylor returned to town at the end of the week, arriving at the cafe late in the afternoon when the lunch rush had subsided. Rebecca spotted him the moment he walked through the door, his tall frame unmistakable, hat in hand as he scanned the room and found her. "Miss Sanders," he greeted with a nod. "You're looking better." Rebecca touched her hair self-consciously. She had pinned it severely back, attempting to look as unremarkable as possible. "Mr. Taylor, what can I get you? Coffee, if it's fresh, and whatever Molly's got ready for supper." He settled at a small table by the window, placing his hat on the empty chair across from him. Rebecca brought his coffee, aware of Molly watching from behind the counter. "Beef stew today," she told him, "with biscuits. Sounds perfect." Frank studied her face for a moment. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough," Rebecca answered carefully. "Molly's been kind." Frank's mouth quirked slightly. Kind isn't the first word most folks would use to describe Molly Winters. "Fair then," Rebecca amended, "and patient with my learning." "Good." Frank sipped his coffee. "Town treating you all right?" Rebecca hesitated. There had been whispers, of course. Speculative glances, but nothing she hadn't expected. "Yes, though I keep mostly to myself." Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Might be for the best for now. People get curious about newcomers. Eventually, they find something else to talk about." Rebecca brought his stew, setting it carefully before him. As she turned to go, Frank spoke again. "The church socials tomorrow night," he said casually. "Whole town turns out. Good way to meet folks." Rebecca stiffened slightly. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Taylor." "Why not?" he asked, breaking a biscuit in half. "I'm sure you know why," Rebecca replied quietly. Frank looked up at her, his blue eyes steady. "No, Miss Sanders, I don't. You work honest hours at an honest job. You've got as much right to attend as anyone. The church might feel differently." "Pastor Miller believes in redemption more than judgment," Frank said. "But suit yourself. Just thought you might enjoy some music and conversation that doesn't involve taking food orders." Rebecca hesitated, torn between longing for some relief from her isolation and fear of the rejection she was certain would come. "I'll consider it," she finally said. Frank nodded and turned his attention to his meal, and Rebecca moved to attend to other customers. When he left an hour later, he placed his payment on the table with a generous tip, nodding goodbye without further conversation about the social. That evening, as Rebecca prepared for bed, she found herself staring at the single dress she had managed to keep presentable through her journey. It would need pressing, but it was modest and unremarkable, perhaps suitable for a church social in a frontier town. The thought of an evening of music and normal conversation was tempting after weeks of lonely isolation. The next morning, she mentioned the social to Molly as they prepared the cafe for opening. "Planning to go, are you?" Molly asked, eyebrows raised. "I thought I might," Rebecca said cautiously, "if you can spare me." Molly studied her for a moment. Was this Frank Taylor's suggestion? Rebecca nodded, suddenly uncertain. "He mentioned it yesterday." Molly's expression softened slightly. "Frank's a good man, but he doesn't always understand how people can be, especially to women in certain circumstances." "I'm not expecting anything from him," Rebecca said quickly. He was just being kind. I know that, not sure everyone else will, Molly sighed. But you can't hide forever, girl, and it's a public gathering. You've as much right as anyone. She paused. I'll lend you my blue shawl, it'll brighten up that gray dress of yours. Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Molly. Don't thank me yet, the older woman warned. Prescott likes to think it's civilized, but it's still a frontier town. People talk. You go in there knowing that. Rebecca nodded, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest. I know how people talk, Molly. I've heard it before. Molly's eyes narrowed slightly, but she asked no questions. We close early tonight anyway. Social starts at 7. The social was held in the town's modest church, with benches pushed to the walls and a small group of local musicians set up at the front. By the time Rebecca arrived, the gathering was already underway, the church filled with the sounds of conversation, laughter, and music. She paused in the doorway, Molly's blue shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her heart pounding. For a moment, she considered turning back, retreating to the safety of her small room. Then Pastor Miller spotted her from across the room and approached with a welcoming smile. You must be Miss Sanders, he said, extending his hand. Molly's new helper, I'm Pastor Miller. Welcome to our little community. Rebecca shook his hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in his greeting. Thank you, Pastor. It's a lovely gathering. We do our best, he replied. Not much for entertainment out here, so we make our own. Do you play an instrument, Miss Sanders? Piano, Rebecca admitted before she could think better of it. But it's been some time. Well, we have a piano right there, Pastor Miller said, gesturing toward an upright piano in the corner. Mrs. Bennett usually plays, but she's visiting her sister in Phoenix. Perhaps later you might favor us with a tune. Before Rebecca could formulate a polite refusal, she became aware of a presence beside her and turned to find Frank Taylor standing there, hat in hand. Evening, Miss Sanders, he said with a nod. Pastor. Frank, good to see you, Pastor Miller said. I was just trying to convince Miss Sanders to play for us later. Is that so? Frank's eyes met Rebecca's, a glint of amusement in their depths. Didn't know you were musical. It's been years, Rebecca said quickly. I couldn't possibly. Well, the offer stands, Pastor Miller said kindly. I should greet the Thompsons, excuse me. As the pastor moved away, Rebecca became acutely aware of the curious glances being directed their way. Frank seemed to notice as well. Would you like some punch? He asked, offering his arm. It's terrible stuff, mostly sugar, but it's tradition. Rebecca hesitated before placing her hand lightly on his arm. I shouldn't have come, she said quietly as he guided her toward the refreshment table. Nonsense, Frank replied. You're doing fine. Everyone's staring. They're curious is all. New face in town talking to the confirmed bachelor rancher. Gives them something to speculate about besides cattle prices. Rebecca nearly stumbled. I didn't mean to cause gossip. I should go. Frank's hand covered hers briefly, steadying her. Or you could stay and show them you're just a normal person enjoying a social like anyone else. Rebecca looked up at him, trying to understand his motivation. Why are you doing this, Mr. Taylor? Frank considered her question as he handed her a cup of punch. Because everyone deserves a fair chance, he said finally. And because you looked like you needed one. Before she could respond, they were approached by a middle-aged couple, the woman's eyes bright with curiosity. Frank Taylor, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend? The woman asked. Sarah Robert, this is Miss Rebecca Sanders, Frank said easily. She's working for Molly at the cafe. Miss Sanders, Sarah, and Robert Cooper, they run the mercantile. Pleased to meet you, Rebecca said, falling back on years of social training. We've seen you at the cafe, Sarah Cooper said, her eyes taking in every detail of Rebecca's appearance. You're not from around here. No, madam, I'm from back east originally. Boston, Frank supplied, surprising Rebecca. At her questioning look, he added, your accent, not hard to place if you've traveled some. Boston, Sarah exclaimed. My, that's a long way to come. Family out this way? No, Rebecca said, tension creeping back into her shoulders. No family. An awkward silence fell, broken by Robert Cooper clearing his throat. Well, we're glad to have you in Prescott, Miss Sanders. Town can always use new faces. The conversation mercifully shifted to local matters, the upcoming harvest, the new shipment of goods expected at the mercantile, the recent birth of twins to a family on the outskirts of town. Rebecca remained quiet, sipping her punch and observing the interactions around her. As the evening progressed, more townspeople approached, some genuinely welcoming, others barely disguising their curiosity behind polite inquiries. Through it all, Frank remained at her side, his steady presence both comforting and confusing. Why this successful rancher had taken such an interest in her welfare, Rebecca couldn't fathom. When the current song ended, Pastor Miller approached the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just learned we have a pianist in our midst. Miss Sanders, would you honor us with a song?" All eyes turned toward Rebecca, whose face flushed with embarrassment and alarm. "I really couldn't," she protested. "It's been too long." "Nonsense," called Mrs. Cooper. "We rarely get to hear proper music." Rebecca looked to Frank, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Your choice," he said quietly. But sometimes facing a thing head-on is better than running from it. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca moved toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she settled onto the bench, keenly aware of the watching crowd. She placed her fingers on the keys, closing her eyes briefly to steady herself. Then she began to play a simple hymn she had learned as a child, one she could perform without thought. The notes came haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence as muscle memory took over. She transitioned seamlessly into a folk melody, one her mother had taught her years before. For those few minutes, Rebecca forgot her circumstances, lost in the familiar comfort of music. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, she was startled by the enthusiastic applause that followed. "My goodness," Mrs. Cooper exclaimed. "That was lovely, Miss Sanders," Pastor Miller beamed. "I think we've found our new pianist for Sunday services, if you're willing." Rebecca blinked in surprise. I don't know if that would be appropriate, Pastor. Music is for everyone," he said firmly, "and we're in desperate need. Mrs. Bennet won't be back for months." Rebecca glanced around at the nodding heads and encouraging smiles. Not everyone looked pleased. She noted several women whispering behind their hands, but the overall reception was warmer than she had dared hope. "I would be honored," she said finally, warmth spreading through her chest at the small acceptance. As the evening wound down, Frank offered to walk Rebecca back to the cafe. The night air was cool, stars brilliant in the clear Arizona sky. "Thank you," Rebecca said as they walked. "For encouraging me to come tonight," Frank nodded. "You played beautifully." "It felt good," she admitted, "to do something normal again." They reached the cafe door, stopping beneath the lantern that illuminated the entrance. In its light, Rebecca could see Frank studying her face, his expression thoughtful. "Sunday services start at 10, he said. "I'll stop by around 9:30 to walk with you if that's all right." Rebecca hesitated. "Mr. Taylor, you've been very kind, but I don't want to be a charity case." "Or a cause for gossip," Frank, he corrected. "And I'm not offering charity, Miss Sanders, just neighborliness." "Rebecca," she said quietly, "if we're to be on a first-name basis." A smile touched Frank's lips. "Rebecca, then," he tipped his hat. "Good night, I'll see you Sunday." As Rebecca watched him walk away, she felt something unfamiliar stir within her, a fragile tendril of hope, so long absent she almost didn't recognize it. Shaking her head at her own foolishness, she unlocked the cafe door and stepped inside. One pleasant evening didn't change who she was or what had happened. The shame might recede temporarily, but it always returned, as much a part of her now as her own skin. Still, as she prepared for bed, Rebecca found herself humming one of the hymns from the social, her fingers moving in remembered patterns against the rough cotton of her nightgown. For tonight, at least, the music was louder than the whispers of the past. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of approaching winter. Rebecca had risen early, pressing her gray dress again and pinning her hair in a modest style that she hoped would be appropriate for church. As promised, Frank arrived at 9:30, dressed in his Sunday best, a clean dark suit that, while not fashionable by Eastern standards, was well-maintained and dignified. "You look nice," he said simply as she met him at the cafe door. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, feeling oddly nervous. "So do you." They walked to the church in companionable silence, joining the flow of townsfolk making their way to Sunday services. Rebecca was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way, but Frank seemed unconcerned. greeting neighbors and acquaintances with easy familiarity. Pastor Miller was waiting at the church door, his face lighting up when he saw Rebecca. "Miss Sanders, I was hoping you'd come. The piano's all ready for you." Rebecca allowed herself to be ushered to the piano at the front of the church, while Frank took a seat in one of the middle pews. As the congregation filled in around him, Rebecca noticed several women leaning close to whisper to one another, their eyes darting between her and Frank. Focusing on the sheet music before her, Rebecca pushed aside her discomfort. When Pastor Miller gave her the nod, she began to play the opening hymn, losing herself once more in the familiar patterns of notes and chords. Throughout the service, she played when indicated, her confidence growing with each piece. Pastor Miller's sermon focused on forgiveness and new beginnings, his words seemingly directed at everyone and no one in particular. Rebecca couldn't help but wonder if the message had been chosen with her in mind. After the final hymn, Rebecca remained at the piano, organizing the sheet music as the congregation filed out. She was surprised when several people approached to compliment her playing. "You've got a real gift, Miss Sanders," Mrs. Cooper said warmly. "Such a blessing for our little church." "Thank you," Rebecca said, genuinely touched by the kindness. "It feels good to play again." As the church emptied, Frank approached the piano. "You were right at home there," he observed. Rebecca smiled slightly. "Music was a large part of my upbringing. My mother insisted on daily practice." "She taught you well." Frank hesitated. "I usually take Sunday dinner at Molly's. Would you join me?" The invitation caught Rebecca off guard. "I should help Molly with the serving," she began. "I already asked her," Frank said. "She said you're entitled to eat sometime, and it might as well be with company." Rebecca studied his face, looking for hidden motives but finding only straightforward interest. "All right," she agreed finally. "Thank you." Sunday dinner at Molly's was a town tradition, the cafe filling with families fresh from church services. Molly had reserved a small table in the corner for Frank and Rebecca, providing a measure of privacy amidst the bustling room. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly, answering Frank's careful questions about her musical background and her impressions of Arizona. He spoke of his ranch, describing the land he had worked for the past decade with obvious pride and affection. "Sounds like a beautiful place," Rebecca said, genuinely interested. "You built it all yourself." "Started with 20 acres and a run-down cabin," Frank confirmed. "Now it's 1,200 acres, good grazing land and a proper house. Took years of hard work, but it's mine. No debts, no partners." "That's impressive," Rebecca said. "You must be very proud." "It's a good life," Frank agreed. "Lonely sometimes, but satisfying." Rebecca hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "No family," a shadow crossed Frank's face. "Had a wife once, Sarah. She died in childbirth our second year here. The baby, too." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said softly, understanding now the pain she sometimes glimpsed behind his steady gaze. Frank nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "It was a long time ago, 9 years this winter. And you never remarried." "Never met anyone who made me want to," he said simply. "Until recently, anyway." The implication hung in the air between them. Rebecca looked down at her plate, unsure how to respond. Frank seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'm not proposing, Rebecca," he said quietly, "just being honest. I find you interesting. I'd like to know you better." Rebecca met his gaze. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're brave," he countered. "I know you faced hardship with dignity. I know you play piano like an angel and work harder than most men I know." "You don't know why I came west," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm running from. When you're ready to tell me, I'll listen," Frank replied. "Until then, it's your business." Rebecca studied him, this straightforward man so different from the polished gentleman of her Boston past. "I was engaged," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "To a man my parents approved of. A good match, everyone said." Frank waited silently, giving her space to continue or stop as she chose. "I discovered he was not what he appeared to be," Rebecca continued, choosing her words carefully. "When I broke the engagement, he spread rumors, terrible accusations. In Boston, a woman's reputation is everything. Once it's lost," she shook her head. My family couldn't bear the scandal. They gave me money to disappear, to stop being a reminder of their disgrace. Frank's expression hardened. So you came west. As far as my money would take me, Rebecca confirmed. I had no plan beyond escape. And now, Rebecca looked around the busy cafe at the life she had stumbled into. Now I'm taking each day as it comes, learning to be useful in ways I never imagined. Frank nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're doing just fine. He hesitated, then added, and your family's a pack of fools. A startled laugh escaped Rebecca. That's a rather blunt assessment. I'm a blunt man, Frank replied with a slight smile. One of my many character flaws, according to Molly. The tension broken, they finished their meal in easier conversation. As Frank prepared to leave, he paused, seeming to debate with himself. I'm bringing cattle to town on Friday, he said finally. Thought I might take you to dinner at the hotel afterward, if you'd like. Rebecca hesitated, aware of the implications of such an invitation. A single woman dining with a bachelor at the town's only hotel would certainly cause talk, yet the prospect of an evening in Frank's company was undeniably appealing. I'd like that, she said, decision made. Frank's smile was brief but genuine. Friday then. I'll come by around 6. As October gave way to November, Rebecca found herself settling into life in Prescott with increasing comfort. Her position at the cafe provided stability. Her Sunday piano playing offered connection to the community, and her growing friendship with Frank Taylor gave her something she had not expected to find again: hope for a future different from the lonely exile she had imagined for herself. They had established a routine of sorts: Sunday dinner after church, occasional evening walks when Frank was in town on business, and now weekly dinners at the hotel every Friday. The townsfolk had, predictably, taken notice. Some, like the Coopers and Pastor Miller, seemed pleased by the development. Others remained skeptical, the whispers following Rebecca never quite disappearing. Molly had become something of a protective figure, defending Rebecca from the worst of the gossip with her formidable reputation and sharp tongue. Don't pay them any mind, she told Rebecca one afternoon after a particularly pointed remark from a customer. Half of them are just jealous Frank Taylors showing interest in you instead of their daughters. And the other half, Rebecca asked wryly. Molly snorted. The other half are just natural-born busybodies who'd find something to criticize if Jesus himself walked into town. Rebecca smiled, grateful for the older woman's support. Do you think I'm being foolish? With Frank, I mean. Molly considered the question as she wiped down the counter. Frank Taylor's the finest man in this territory, she said finally. Lost himself when Sarah died. Buried himself in that ranch and shut everything else out. First time I've seen life in his eyes in years is when he looks at you. Rebecca blushed. That's not exactly an answer. Yes, it is, Molly replied. Just not the one you're afraid to hear. She paused in her work, fixing Rebecca with a serious look. Whatever happened back east, girl, it doesn't define you, not unless you let it. On Friday evening, Rebecca dressed with particular care for dinner with Frank. The weather had turned colder, and she wrapped Molly's blue shawl around her shoulders before descending to the cafe to wait. Frank arrived precisely at 6, as he always did. Tonight, however, something was different. He carried a package wrapped in brown paper, which he handed to Rebecca as they greeted each other. What's this? She asked, surprised. Open it and see, he replied, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. Rebecca carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful wool coat in a deep burgundy color, far finer than anything available in Prescott's modest mercantile. Frank, she breathed, running her fingers over the soft fabric. It's beautiful, but I can't accept this. Winter's coming, he said practically. That shawl won't keep you warm enough. I ordered it from a catalog when I was in Tucson last month. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. Thank you, she said softly. It's perfect. Frank helped her into the coat, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. Looks right on you, he said, satisfaction in his voice. They walked to the hotel dining room, Rebecca warm in her new coat, acutely aware of Frank's presence beside her. The maitre d' greeted them by name, leading them to what had become their table by the window. As they settled into their meal, Rebecca noticed Frank seemed preoccupied, his usual easy conversation more hesitant. "Is everything all right?" she asked finally. "You seem distracted." Frank met her gaze, a decision visibly forming behind his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about us." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Oh, I've grown fond of you, Rebecca," he continued, his directness both alarming and refreshing. "More than fond, if I'm being honest." "Frank," he raised a hand, asking for her silence. "Let me finish, please. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, life moves differently. We make decisions based on what we see, not on some arbitrary timeline." Rebecca waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I'm not proposing marriage," Frank clarified. "Not yet. That would be presumptuous given all you've been through, but I am proposing a courtship, proper and open." "A courtship," Rebecca repeated, the word feeling strangely formal on her lips. "Yes." Frank leaned forward slightly. "I want to court you, Rebecca Sanders, with the intention of marriage if we find we suit each other as well as I believe we might." Rebecca felt tears threatening again. "Frank, you don't know what you're asking." "The rumors, the scandal, I don't give a damn about rumors," Frank interrupted, rare passion in his voice. "And neither should you. Whatever happened in Boston, it's past. I care about who you are now, the woman I've come to know these past months." "The town will talk," Rebecca warned. "Let them," Frank said simply. "They'll find something else to talk about eventually." Rebecca studied his face, the sincerity in his blue eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and certainty. "Yes," she said finally, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that transformed Frank's face was worth any amount of gossip. He reached across the table to take her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "You've made me very happy, Rebecca." "You've given me something I never thought to have again," she replied softly. "A chance to start anew." As winter descended on Prescott, Rebecca found herself embracing a life she could never have imagined in her Boston days. The cafe work remained demanding but satisfying in its simplicity. Her Sunday piano playing had expanded to include occasional lessons for several of the town's children, providing a small additional income and reconnecting her to the music she had always loved. And then there was Frank. True to his word, he courted her openly and properly, regular dinners at the hotel, Sunday drives in his wagon when weather permitted, always respectful and never inappropriate. Yet beneath the propriety, Rebecca sensed a deepening connection between them, a growing understanding that transcended words. They spoke of everything: his ranch and his dreams for its future, her childhood in Boston, books they had both read, their views on politics and religion. The only subject they rarely touched was the specific nature of the scandal that had driven her west, though Frank had made it clear he was willing to listen whenever she was ready to share. 2 weeks before Christmas, Frank invited Rebecca to visit the Circle T Ranch. "I'd like you to see it," he said during their Friday dinner, "to know what you'd be getting into if—" He left the implication hanging. "If I were to accept a proposal," Rebecca finished for him, a smile playing at her lips. Their courtship was common knowledge now, and few in town doubted where it was heading. "Something like that," Frank acknowledged. "Molly says she can spare you tomorrow. I thought we could ride out in the morning, spend the day, and I'd have you back by evening." Rebecca nodded, anticipation fluttering in her chest. "I'd like that very much." The following morning dawned bright and cold, frost glittering on the ground as Frank helped Rebecca into his wagon. Wrapped in her burgundy coat and the warm blankets he had brought, Rebecca watched the town recede behind them as they headed into the surrounding countryside. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the wagon following well-worn tracks through increasingly rugged terrain. As they crested a rise, Frank drew the horses to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. The Circle T, spread below them, was a wide valley, sheltered by rocky ridges on 3 sides. A substantial log house stood near a creek that wound through the property, with several outbuildings arranged nearby. In the distance, cattle grazed on winter-browned grass, their forms small dark dots against the landscape. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said, genuinely impressed by the orderly ranch and its dramatic setting. Frank nodded, pleased by her reaction. It's good land, plenty of water even in dry years, good protection from the worst weather. He clicked to the horses, guiding the wagon down the slope toward the house. As they approached, an older Mexican man emerged from one of the outbuildings, raising a hand in greeting. "That's Manuel," Frank explained. "He and his wife, Elena, help me run the place. Live in the small cabin beyond the barn. Good people." Manuel approached as Frank helped Rebecca down from the wagon. "Señor Frank, you bring the lady to visit at last," Frank smiled. "Manuel, this is Miss Rebecca Sanders. Rebecca, Manuel Ortiz, the best ranch foreman in the territory." Manuel removed his hat, bowing slightly to Rebecca. "Welcome to Circle T, señorita. Elena is preparing lunch. She will be very happy to meet you." Rebecca smiled warmly. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to meeting her as well." Manuel nodded, eyes twinkling as he glanced between them. "I will take care of the horses, Señor Frank. You show the lady your home." The main house was larger than Rebecca had expected, built of substantial logs with a stone foundation. Inside, it was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a separate kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. The furniture was sturdy and well-made, if unrefined by Eastern standards. What surprised Rebecca most were the bookshelves lining one wall of the main room, filled with volumes on a wide range of subjects. "You have quite a library," she observed, running her fingers along the spines. "Winter nights are long," Frank replied. "Reading passes the time. Sarah started the collection. I've added to it over the years." Rebecca turned to him, struck by the casual mention of his late wife. It was the first time he had spoken of her so naturally, without the weight of grief shadowing his words. "She must have been a remarkable woman," Rebecca said softly. "She was," Frank agreed. "Strong, determined. It takes a special kind of woman to build a life out here." He held Rebecca's gaze. "Like you." Before Rebecca could respond, the door opened and an older woman entered, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face weathered but kind. "Elena," Frank said. "This is Miss Sanders." Elena smiled warmly, extending work-roughened hands to take Rebecca's. "Welcome, Miss Sanders." "Manuel said you were beautiful. He did not exaggerate," Rebecca blushed. "Thank you for welcoming me to your home." Elena laughed. "Not my home, señorita. This is Señor Frank's home, but we take care of it like our own." She turned to Frank. "Lunch is ready when you are. I made your favorite stew." "Thank you, Elena," Frank said. "We'll be there shortly." After Elena left, Frank turned back to Rebecca. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch before we eat?" Rebecca nodded, and Frank led her outside, showing her the barn, the corrals, the smokehouse, and the spring house where perishable food was kept cool. He explained the operation of the ranch with obvious pride and knowledge, pointing out improvements he had made and others he planned for the future. As they walked, Rebecca found herself imagining a life here, the rhythms of ranch work, the isolation that would be both challenge and blessing, the beauty of the landscape in all seasons. It was so different from the life she had once expected to lead, yet she could see its appeal with increasing clarity. Lunch was a pleasant affair. Elena's beef stew rich and flavorful after the morning in the crisp air. Manuel joined them, and Rebecca enjoyed listening to the easy banter between the 2 men, evidence of a long and respectful working relationship. After the meal, Frank suggested a ride to see more of the property. "Elena packed a basket for us," he said. "There's a spot I'd like to show you if you're not too tired." "I'd love that," Rebecca replied, eager to see more of the ranch. Manuel saddled 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding for Frank and a gentle dappled mare for Rebecca. Though her riding skills were rusty, Rebecca found her seat quickly, grateful for the years of lessons her parents had insisted upon in her youth. They rode for almost an hour, Frank pointing out landmarks and boundaries, sharing stories of the ranch's development. Finally, they crested another rise to find a small plateau overlooking the valley, a single oak tree providing shade even in winter with its sprawling branches. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Frank said as they dismounted. "You can see everything from here." He spread a blanket beneath the tree, and they settled side by side, the basket of food between them. The view was indeed spectacular. The entire valley spread before them, the ranch buildings now small in the distance. mountains rising beyond. "I can see why you love it," Rebecca said, accepting the cup of coffee Frank poured from a thermos. "There's something peaceful about being able to see so far." "That's exactly it," Frank agreed. "Perspective, problems seem smaller from up here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and sharing the apple tarts Alina had packed. Eventually, Frank turned to face Rebecca, his expression serious. "There's something I need to ask you," he began. "Something I've been wondering about for months now." Rebecca tensed slightly. "Yes, what really happened in Boston?" Frank asked quietly. "I know there was a broken engagement, rumors, but there's more to it, isn't there? Something that still haunts you." Rebecca looked away, gazing out over the valley as she gathered her thoughts. Perhaps it was the distance from town, the openness of the landscape, or simply the right moment finally arriving, but she found herself ready to speak the truth she had carried alone for so long. "My fiancé was Charles Winthrop," she began, the name bitter on her tongue. "From one of Boston's oldest families. The engagement was arranged by our fathers, a business merger as much as a marriage. I wasn't opposed. He was handsome, charming. I thought I could build a life with him." Frank listened silently, his face impassive. 3 weeks before the wedding, I went to his office unexpectedly. His secretary was away, so I let myself in." Rebecca paused, the memory still sharp. "He was there with a young woman. A girl, really. She couldn't have been more than 15. He was, forcing himself on her." Frank's expression darkened. "Go on," he said quietly. "I confronted him, of course. The girl fled. Charles was furious." Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap. "He told me to forget what I'd seen, that it was none of my concern. When I refused and broke the engagement, he changed tactics." "What did he do?" Frank asked, anger evident in his voice. "He told everyone I had been unfaithful," Rebecca said flatly. "That he had caught me with another man. In Boston society, such an accusation against a woman is devastating. It doesn't matter if it's true. The mere suggestion is enough to ruin her. And your family didn't defend you," Rebecca laughed bitterly. "They asked me if it was true. When I denied it and told them the real reason I had broken the engagement, my father was more concerned about the business implications than the fact that my fiancé was a predator. My mother worried only about the scandal. They suggested I go abroad for a while, until it blew over." "But you came west instead," Frank supplied. Rebecca nodded. "I took what money I had saved and what they offered for my European tour. I had no plan except to get as far away as possible. I changed my name slightly. It was Sanders Hillcrest originally. I thought perhaps in a place where no one knew me I might start fresh." "And now," Frank asked, "do you still feel that shame they forced on you?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Less," she admitted. "Each day a little less. Being useful, being accepted for my work rather than my family name or social standing, it's healing, in a way I never expected." Frank reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "There's no shame in standing up for what's right," he said firmly. "Only honor." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. "I know that logically, but feelings aren't always logical." "No," Frank agreed, "they're not." He hesitated, then continued. "Rebecca, I have something to ask you, something I've been wanting to ask for weeks now." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Frank, I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you looked so lost, but held yourself with such dignity. Every day since has only confirmed what I felt then, that you are a woman of extraordinary strength and grace." "Frank," Rebecca whispered, tears now flowing freely. "I'm asking you to be my wife," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "To build a life with me here, it won't always be easy. Ranch life is hard work, and we're far from town and the comforts you might be used to. But I promise you'll never face difficulty alone again. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Rebecca looked at this man so different from Charles Winthrop and the polished society men she had known, yet so much more genuine, more honorable. She thought of the ranch spread below them, the life it represented. Not the life she had been raised to expect, but perhaps the one she was meant to have. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, Frank, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was worth every painful step of the journey that had brought her west. Frank gathered her into his arms, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, both were breathless. When? Frank asked simply. Soon, Rebecca replied. I don't want a long engagement, Frank smiled. Christmas is in 2 weeks, too soon. Rebecca laughed, happiness bubbling up unexpectedly, perhaps a bit, but January, after the new year. January it is, Frank agreed. We'll speak to Pastor Miller tomorrow. As they rode back to the ranch house, the winter sun beginning its early descent, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. The shame that had been her constant companion since Boston seemed to have loosened its grip, unable to maintain its hold in the face of Frank's love and acceptance. That evening, as Frank drove her back to town, they planned their future a small wedding at the church, Elena to help Rebecca settle into the ranch house, the possibility of children someday. Simple plans, but infinitely precious to a woman who had once thought all possibility of happiness lost. News of their engagement spread quickly through Prescott. Most offered sincere congratulations, though a few continued to whisper behind raised hands. Molly was openly delighted, immediately offering to host a small reception at the cafe after the ceremony. Knew from the first day he brought you in here that Frank Taylor had finally met his match, she told Rebecca with satisfaction. About time, too. Man's been alone too long. Pastor Miller was equally pleased, agreeing readily to perform the ceremony on the first Saturday in January. A new year, a new beginning, he said approvingly. Very fitting. The Christmas season passed in a blur of preparations. Frank traveled to Tucson to purchase a proper ring and returned with a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. It's not fancy, he apologized as he slipped it onto Rebecca's finger. But it's solid, like what I'm offering you. It's perfect, Rebecca assured him, admiring how it caught the light. I've never cared for ostentatious jewelry. On Christmas Day, Frank joined Rebecca for the church service, where she played seasonal hymns with particular joy. Afterward, they dined with Molly, who had closed the cafe to regular customers for the holiday. My gift to you, Frank said after the meal, presenting Rebecca with a small package. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When opened, it revealed a miniature photograph of Frank on one side, the other side was empty. I thought we might take a photograph together after the wedding, he explained, to complete it. Rebecca was deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It's beautiful, Frank, I'll treasure it always. Her gift to him was more practical, a fine leather-bound journal she had ordered through the mercantile. For recording ranch matters, she explained. Or whatever thoughts you wish to preserve. Frank ran his fingers over the embossed leather. No one's given me something so personal in years, he said softly. Thank you. The weeks before the wedding passed quickly. Rebecca gave notice to Molly, who accepted her resignation with gruff affection. Always knew you were too good for slinging hash, she said, but I'll miss you around here. I'll still come to town regularly, Rebecca promised, and you must visit us at the ranch. We'll see, Molly said, though her expression softened. Might be nice to get out of town now and then. Elena and Manuel traveled to town to meet Rebecca properly, bringing gifts of hand-embroidered linens and a beautiful quilt Elena had made. For your new home, Elena said warmly. Though it is already your home in our hearts. The night before the wedding, Rebecca stood in her room above the cafe, packing the few possessions she had accumulated during her months in Prescott. Her life still fit into a single trunk, a fact that would have horrified her mother, who had never traveled with fewer than 6 trunks of clothing and necessities. Yet Rebecca felt no deprivation. Tomorrow she would marry a man who loved her for herself, who knew her worst secrets and still looked at her with admiration and desire. She would begin a new life on land that felt somehow right, as though she had been traveling toward it all along without knowing. The shame that had driven her west hadn't disappeared entirely. Such deep wounds didn't heal overnight. But it had transformed from a crushing weight to an occasional shadow, easily dispelled by the light of her new reality. January 5, 1879, dawned clear and cold. Rebecca dressed carefully in a new gown of deep blue wool, ordered from Tucson with Molly's help. It was simpler than the wedding gown she had once expected to wear in Boston, but like her engagement ring, it suited this new life perfectly. Molly helped her with her hair, arranging it in a simple but elegant style adorned with a small spray of winter berries and evergreen. "You look beautiful, girl," Molly said, surprising Rebecca with the uncharacteristic compliment. "Frank Taylor's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Rebecca replied softly. The church was filled with townsfolk, some merely curious, others genuinely supportive of the union. Frank waited at the altar, Manuel at his side as best man. When Rebecca entered on Pastor Miller's arm, in the absence of her father, Frank's expression of wonder and love erased any lingering doubts she might have harbored. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows exchanged with clear voices and steady hands. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Frank's kiss was tender but thorough, bringing a scattering of applause from the congregation. The reception at Molly's Cafe was a lively affair, the community coming together to celebrate in the frontier way with abundant food, music, and dancing. Rebecca played the piano for several songs, then joined Frank for a dance, her heart full as she looked around at the people who had become, in a few short months, a kind of family to her. As evening approached, Frank led his bride to the waiting wagon, now decorated with ribbons and bells by the younger members of the congregation. Amid cheers and well wishes, they set off for the Circle T, leaving the town behind as darkness fell. The ranch house was warm and welcoming, lamps lit in every window. Elena had prepared a special supper, then tactfully retired with Manuel to their cabin, leaving the newlyweds alone. That night, as Rebecca gave herself to her husband with trust and growing passion, the last vestiges of shame that had clung to her seemed to dissolve in the face of such complete acceptance. Frank's hands and lips spoke of reverence and desire in equal measure, his patience and tenderness bringing Rebecca to heights of pleasure she had never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms, she whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, stroking her hair. "For seeing me," she replied simply. "The real me, not the shame I carried." Frank's arms tightened around her. "Shame has no place on this land," he said, echoing his words from that first meeting. "No place in our life together." As winter gave way to spring, Rebecca settled into her role as mistress of Circle T Ranch. The transition had its challenges, learning to cook on a wood stove, managing the household accounts, adjusting to the isolation after months of town life. But each day brought new confidence and satisfaction as she made the ranch house truly her own. Frank watched her transformation with quiet pride, supporting without interfering as she found her place in this new world. Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, reading aloud to each other from Frank's library, discussing the day's events, planning for the future of the ranch. Their nights were a continuing discovery of each other, their physical connection deepening alongside their emotional bond. In late March, Rebecca received an unexpected letter forwarded from Boston through a series of addresses until it reached Prescott. It was from her youngest sister, Emily, the only family member who had openly supported Rebecca through the scandal. "I have news you should know," Emily wrote. "Charles Winthrop has been arrested. 2 other young women came forward with stories similar to what you witnessed. This time, their families believed them and pressed charges. Boston society is in an uproar, of course, but the evidence is substantial. Your name has been mentioned as having tried to warn people about his character. Some who shunned you are now expressing regret." Rebecca read the letter to Frank that evening by the fire. When she finished, he took her hand. "How do you feel about this?" he asked. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Vindicated in some ways," she admitted. "Sad for those other girls, and oddly, detached, as if it happened to someone else in another life." Frank nodded, understanding. "It was another life, you've built a new one here." "I have," Rebecca agreed, looking around the cozy room that had become her home. "A better one." In April, Rebecca confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child. Frank's joy at the news was boundless, his protectiveness of her increasing in ways that Rebecca found both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one day when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. Frank grinned unabashed, Can't help it. It's my job to take care of you both now. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Rebecca's body changed, growing round with new life, and Frank found her more beautiful than ever, telling her so with words and touches that left her in no doubt of his sincerity. Their son, James Manuel Taylor, was born on a clear November evening in 1879, with Alina serving as midwife and Frank pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed inside, Frank approached the bed with reverence, gazing down at his wife and newborn son with wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the tiny fingers that curled around his own. "Just like his mother." Rebecca smiled tiredly up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "I think he looks like you," she said, noting the strong brow and determined chin already evident in the infant's features. "Poor boy," Frank joked, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope he gets your brains and talent along with my stubborn streak." In the years that followed, the Circle T Ranch prospered under the Taylors' careful management. Frank expanded the cattle operation, while Rebecca established a productive vegetable garden and orchard that supplied most of their food needs. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind. Rebecca never returned to Boston, though she maintained correspondence with Emily, who eventually visited the ranch, falling in love with the western landscape and her nephew. The rest of the Sanders-Hillcrest family remained distant figures from a past life that seemed increasingly like a dream to Rebecca. In 1882, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Sarah Alina Taylor, named for the two women who had, in different ways, helped shape the Circle T. Frank wept openly when Rebecca suggested the names, his heart healed enough by then to honor his first wife's memory without pain. By 1885, the Circle T was known throughout the territory as one of the most successful ranching operations in Arizona. Frank's innovative methods and Rebecca's careful bookkeeping had turned a good ranch into an exceptional one. They had added a small schoolroom to the main house, where Rebecca taught James and Sarah, along with the children of two ranch hands who had joined the operation. On warm evenings, Rebecca often played the small piano Frank had surprised her with on their 5th anniversary, the music drifting across the ranch yard as the family gathered on the porch. Sometimes, watching her husband and children in the golden light of sunset, Rebecca would remember the desperate young woman who had stumbled into Prescott years before, carrying nothing but shame and despair. "Penny for your thoughts," Frank said on one such evening, settling beside her on the porch swing after putting the children to bed. Rebecca smiled, leaning into his familiar strength. "I was just thinking about how far I've come, how different my life is from what I once expected. Regrets?" Frank asked, though the security in his voice suggested he knew the answer. "Not one," Rebecca said firmly, turning to face him. "Everything that happened, even the worst parts, led me here. To you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret that?" Frank's kiss was as tender as their first, yet deepened by years of shared joys and challenges. "I told you once that shame had no place on this land," he murmured against her lips. "I think you finally believe me." Rebecca smiled, her heart full as she gazed up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky above their home. "I do," she said simply. "I truly do." In the vast Arizona landscape that had once seemed so alien to a Boston society woman, Rebecca Taylor had found not just a home, but redemption. The shame that had once defined her had been transformed into a strength that helped her build a life of substance, and meaning a life measured not by social standing or appearances, but by love freely given and received, by work well done, and by the legacy they were creating together in this wild, beautiful land.